The 2025 Browns draft class can change Andrew Berry's reputation in a major, major way. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Can this draft class mend Andrew Berry's reputation as a bad drafter? I think it can. I'll explain why. I've got a bold prediction for Quinshon Judkins to share with you, and we all know Nick Chubb is an all-time great Brown, but is he worthy of the team's Ring of Honor? We didn't get a chance to talk about it last week because we had so much going on with mandatory minicamp, but we will talk about it this week. I do want to thank you for being an everydayer with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well. It's totally free to you. Just hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you get your podcast. And, of course, at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel, where you can also get involved in the show. Share your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comment section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. And to this point, Andrew Berry has developed a reputation outside of the NFL because I do think, from my understanding, people that I've talked to, and just what's said and oftentimes heard about him, he is viewed as a respectable general manager in the NFL, despite the fact that he has the Deshaun Watson trade on his resume, and despite the fact that he's missed on a number of draft picks. In NFL circles, he's well respected. People believe he's a good GM and that he's done good in terms of building a roster as a whole. But I think outside of maybe the perception of his peers, his reputation by fans of Cleveland, fans elsewhere, I think there's this idea, there's this feeling that he just is not he's not very good at drafting talent and developing talent at the NFL level. And the draft has been his bugaboo, right? We talk all the time. He has been brilliant when it comes to trading for wide receivers. He traded for Jerry Jeudy. Look what he did last year. Proved he's the number one wide receiver for this team. Great. Amari Cooper, same thing. Stole Amari Cooper from the Cowboys. He gave you a couple great years and was a franchise favorite, a face of the franchise guy. Fans loved him. Like, guy performed at the highest of highs for this franchise. And so he's been able to he's been able to fleece teams when it comes to wide receiver trades and maximize guys that were already in the NFL. But he hasn't been able to find a wide receiver in the draft worth a damn. And I think as you look through his draft classes, like, there's only one guy that we can say at this point was a slam dunk pick for Andrew Berry during his time here with the Browns. It was JOK. JOK was a slam dunk pick. It was a second round guy. It was a guy who, became a Pro Bowler. Unfortunately, it got derailed by the injury last year, the neck injury last year. We don't know if he'll ever play again. He's not playing in 2025, which is part of the reason why I believe they drafted Carson Schlesinger this year. And that's not Andrew Berry's fault. I'm not putting that on him. That one he gets credit for. He gets credit for landing JOK and finding a great player. And then part of the reason why he was available in the second round, it was a steal. JOK that year was a player coming out that people thought was a first round pick, and he sort of slid in the second round. The Browns took the opportunity to draft him. So it's a good pick by Berry. He gets credit for that one. There haven't been a lot of other like hits or guys that you consensusly know, like, that was a huge get for them, guy who panned out wholeheartedly. Now you can say like a guy like Grant Delpit, for example. Delpit's been good. Delpit's been a good player for this team. And that's a guy who was a second round pick in 2020. So Andrew Berry's very first draft. He's become an everyday starter. He's good. Greg Newsome has been good, but he was a first round talent. And so do I think he's a first round talent? I don't think he's developed into that quite yet in his career. So there's a lot of, like, Martin Emerson Jr. as a third round pick. He had the really, really good year, second year, down year last year. What's he going to be? If the truth is somewhere in the middle, I think that you're okay with that. But he hasn't Like there's still some questions there, but there's a lot of misses in the late rounds. And the problem is, like, after the Deshaun deal, Andrew Berry made that deal knowing he wasn't going to have first round picks for quite some time. And when you do that, you got to know that you're going to be able to hit on guys in the second and third rounds. And he hasn't really been able to do that. Cedric Tillman, there's still questions about. Jamari Thrash is a 5th round pick that apparently is going to get a lot of run this year. Mike Hall, 2nd rounder from last year, still sort of seeing what he brings to the table. Zach Zinter's a 3rd round. But there's consensusly, there's not a lot of home runs here. There's not a lot of guys that turned out to be really great players. There's one. It's JOK. And Grant Delpit's maybe a 1B or the second guy on that list. And that's about it. And so as we think about his reputation to this point, and we think about the draft class that he brought in this year, Mason Graham, Carson Schlesinger, Quinshon Judkins, Harold Fannin, Dylan Gabriel, Dylan Sampson, and Shedeur Sanders, this year's class has a chance to massively change the perception of Andrew Berry when it comes to being a drafter or a person who evaluates talent coming out of college and then building your team and your franchise. Jimmy Haslam at the owners' meetings, on top of his comments when it came to the Deshaun Watson situation and how they, quote unquote, took a big swing and a miss and didn't, they have to dig themselves out of this. He mentioned on top of that this year's draft was going to be an important one for their future. On top of next year's draft, right? Next year's draft is going to be an important one for their future. And, that didn't necessarily mean you had to find your quarterback right now. He even talked about that and said, like, listen, we're not going to force the issue there. We're not just going to try to, if we don't find, if there's not a great quarterback in this class and, we're not going to reach on somebody just to reach on somebody, we'll wait. And so that's part of the reason why we had conversations about, is Andrew Berry safe for next year, all these different things, right? But I'll tell you, if this class turns out to be not very good, throw all that out the window. Whether or not Jimmy Haslam wants to see this thing through with him, he's got to hit on some guys in this draft class. And so if he does, if there's multiple players that come out of this draft class that are stars for this team and foundational cornerstone players, then I think Andrew Berry can quickly change his reputation of being a not so good drafter to this point in his tenure and in his career with the Cleveland Browns. And I think the magic number on that is maybe 3 guys. I think Mason Graham has to be a hit. Has to be a hit. It's only the 3rd first-round pick that Andrew Berry's ever had here in Cleveland. The first one was Jedrick Wills. That was a disaster. He's not even on a team right now. He's taking a year off. He's doing a gap year, like when you get out of college and you take a gap year or whatever, or high school to college, you take a gap year, because he was trying to get himself fully healthy. Your second first-round pick is Greg Newsome. I don't think Greg Newsome is getting a second contract. His deal is going to be up at the end of this year. His 5th-year option is the last year he's playing on it right now. He has to get Mason Graham right, especially because of the circumstances surrounding that pick. You traded back from 2, could have had Travis Hunter, a franchise-changing player by all accounts, a guy who does something that has never been seen before. And if he goes out to have a great career and he's doing it with Jacksonville, you're going to be ridiculed forever for passing on him and taking Mason Graham instead of Mason Graham doesn't pan out. So Mason has to be a hit. And then from there, if he gets at least 2 more players that are hits out of that draft and about half of your class, and maybe even a backup quarterback for a long time with Dylan Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders, if that's what those 2 guys plan to be, that's going to be the thing that alters that starts to alter his perception. And the nice thing is, I think he's got a chance to get 3 or more out of this class. Mason Graham is, like I said, has to be one. And I think he's going to be a really good player. I think Quinshon Judkins is going to be one. I think Harold Fannin has a chance to be a hit. And I think Carson Schlesinger has a chance to be a hit. If you get 4 out of 7, that's even better. But I'll tell you, there's one thing that Andrew Berry is going to be judged on the most, and it's what happens with the quarterback position. At the end of the day, this year's draft class can start to turn the tide in terms of how he's viewed as a drafter and developer, how he's viewed as somebody who evaluates talent to build a roster. That narrative about him can change with this class being a resounding success and hitting on multiple guys in this class. That will start to change the conversation a little bit. But at the end of the day, until he lands a franchise quarterback, there are always going to be doubts about this in regards to this conversation with Andrew Berry. That is the ultimate decision he's going to be judged on, especially on the heels of the Deshaun Watson trade, which will forever be held against him as the worst trade in NFL history. And to overcome that, he's going to have a lot of hits from here and find that franchise quarterback at some point. So yes, the 2025 class can change the perception of Andrew Berry as in terms of his ability to draft players, but it's going to take a little bit more than that because he has to identify a franchise quarterback at some point, because at the end of the day, all GMs and coaches to some degree are judged by the quarterback that they get paired with. Andrew Berry has yet to have that happen. The one he's been compared to right now is Deshaun Watson. But in terms of drafting a guy, he hasn't had that opportunity yet until this year, really. These guys are, the starting point. If neither of them are it, fine. He gets maybe one more chance to find that quarterback, probably with next year's class. And if he doesn't, that's probably it for him. Coming up, speaking of this rookie class, I got a bold Quinshon Judkins prediction for you of what I think his numbers are going to be this season. I think you're going to like it. You can tell me if I'm off my rocker or if you agree with me. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. The NBA playoffs are an incredible experience. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's that kind of atmosphere that you must experience live. And this year's matchups have delivered to the nth degree, including with this NBA Finals matchup between the Pacers and the Thunder. And if you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. I used Game Time for the first time this past year when I bought tickets for my wife and I to go to Ohio State, Michigan. We were obviously disappointed in the results, but we do get to say we watched the eventual national champion Ohio State Buckeyes in person. And the ticket buying experience was so smooth that Game Time has now become my go-to app for buying tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, so speaking of this draft class that Andrew Berry has compiled, and speaking of the players in it that we're hoping turn into foundational cornerstone players for them to help Andrew Berry's reputation, one that I think is going to be a hit, one that I think is going to be a massive, impactful player, and I've talked about this a lot already. I talked about it last week, towards the end of last week, like this idea that we're not talking enough about this run game and how important it's going to be, and that the line looks healthy for the first time. And they're going back to the basics of Kevin Stefanski's offense. That was a run-heavy offense in system that had so much success in those early years under Stefanski because of the running backs they had and the offensive line that they had. Like I think the sky is the limit for this ground game in general, and it's going to be the foundation, the identity of this team, which is going to ultimately help whoever wins that quarterback job, obviously, coming here down the pike in training camp and into the regular season. But Quinshon Judkins is the focal point of all this. He is going to be your top running back. He is going to be the guy that, sets the tone for this offense. And as I've said before, the difference for me between the Browns last year with the 3 wins and then maybe winning 6 or 7 games this year is like just have a competent offense. I think that starts with Quinshon. The ability for him to basically, can keep drives alive for this team and extend drives and punch the ball into the end zone for 6. Like they couldn't score points to save their lives last year. That's the key thing here. He's going to get a lot of touches. He's going to be very, very important. And Dylan Sampson's going to be worked in here. Deuce Staley talked about it. Like they both have different skill sets. They both bring different things to the table. He's excited to see what both sort of can do in this offense, and how they're utilized and deployed will be interesting. But I do think Quinshon is going to be the focal point. He's going to be your bell cow workhorse back. With all that said, I'm setting an early prediction for what I think his numbers are going to be. You can tell me if I'm crazy. You can tell me if you agree. But I'm going out and I'm saying that sitting here today on June 17th, I believe that Quinshon Judkins is going to have 1,100 yards in 2025, and I'm going to say 8 touchdowns for this Browns team. I wanted to go a little higher in the touchdowns, but I also didn't want to overdo it. So 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns in a rookie season. I think that'll help him be a Pro Bowler. maybe it's hard because the Pro Bowl voting comes down to fans. And if the Browns aren't very good, he might not get enough votes. But I'm going to say he's a Pro Bowler as well. I think he's going to get in. There's enough people that bounce or skip out in the Pro Bowl that he could sneak his way in at least as an alternate if that becomes the case as well. But I'm going to say 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, Pro Bowl season for Quinshon Judkins. Do you think that's crazy? Do you think that's unachievable for somebody so early in their career that isn't Nick Chubb, who obviously was brilliant in his own right and, you know, did some incredible things even in his first season when he was basically started the year in a timeshare of a backfield with Carlos Hyde. He wasn't a Pro Bowler's first year, but he did have 996 yards. So this would even one up Nick Chubb. But the difference is Quinshon Judkins isn't coming in to a situation where like there's already a running back here established that's the lead guy. Unless you think Jerome Ford's going to be that guy, but I think it's going to be Quinshon heavy to start the year. He's going to be your starting back, and the other guys are going to play off of him, not the other way around. Whereas when Nick Chubb came in, he was playing off of Carlos Hyde. He was kind of the guy trying to earn his stripes, earn his role, and I think it's different this year. They have said that they view Quinshon Judkins as a lead back, as a workhorse back, and we've seen at training or at minicamp how brilliant he already looks. Like this kid looks like the real deal. I know we got to get pads on and see how things look when the bullets are really flying around you, but he's going to be special. I've talked him up a lot. I wanted him here. I'm glad they drafted him. The tendencies of like a Kareem Hunt, where he's such a physical runner, but he's also got the speed. I'm so excited to watch him go to work this year. I think he is going to be a reason why the offense is better than last year, and it is going to be sort of the identity of this offense as a whole. And that they can have a lot of success with him sort of leading that charge, and being at the forefront of what they want to do and setting the tone for everybody else around him. It might be a high bar to set. I think those projections I gave you a couple weeks ago from like ESPN's fantasy side of things were like 900 something yards and 5 touchdowns or whatever. I'm going bigger. I'm going home. I'm saying 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, and you get a great Pro Bowl season out of Quinshon Judkins, who burst on the scene here in year one. And a lot of this, again, does go back to my confidence in this offensive line, which I do still feel like we haven't talked about enough. Like, yes, I get the sense that people think this offensive line just isn't very good anymore because they've aged out or whatever it might be, and they can't stay healthy. And that part is very true. They have not been able to stay healthy. But I think some of the struggles you've seen from, you know, your Joel Bitonio's, or maybe if you feel like he took a step back, or your Wyatt Tellers or whoever it might be, I think a lot of that just stemmed from the things that people like Jack Conklin were talking about at the end of last season. They got away from what they did best. They got away from what their identity was, and they were so focused on building an offense for a quarterback in Deshaun Watson, who just doesn't have it anymore, that they kind of got lost in the shuffle, and the offensive line wasn't put in an advantageous situation to play to their strengths. They're going back to the bread and butter. They're going back to the again, it's and there's been commentary on this. Like, they're not just dusting off Kevin Stefanski's old playbook and calling it a day. Like, they're trying to do some different things. Tommy Rees brings a different perspective to the table. So there are going to be some things that are different, but they are going back to the scheme and the system that they had success with. And Joel Bitonio talked about that 2 weeks ago, where it was like, hey, or I guess was it? No, it was 2 weeks ago. It was before, or I don't even know. I can't, all the days blur together at this point. I want to say it was before the second OTA. It might've been at the start of it wasn't at the start of last week. It was before the second OTA. So yes, 2 weeks ago. It's that wide zone with some gap stuff worked in, with Wyatt sometimes pulling around and just, you know, steamrolling guys. That's what they did so well. And they're getting back to that. And the fact that they're fully healthy, Jack Conklin's healthy, Joel Bitonio's healthy, Wyatt Teller's healthy, DeJuan Jones is healthy. And last year, we didn't get a chance to see like his full potential as the left tackle because of injuries. I'm fascinated to see what this group sort of brings to the table, if they can bounce back to being that superb group that they used to be. And I have confidence that they can, because they're doing the things that fit more of their skill set and what they do. And so because of that, I think it's a launching off point for this offense to, you know, get back to being a strong run team, headlined by Quinshon Judkins. And I am predicting a big season for the rookie running back. Again, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns. Is that crazy? Am I too hyperbolic on Quinshon Judkins because I love him so much and I just can't wait to watch him play? I'm telling you, though, guys, like in watching him at minicamp, he was fantastic. And I get it, just helmets, or as Deuce Staley said, just they're in pajamas right now. But he was bouncing some plays outside. He was making some cuts inside to then get to the second level. He was shrinking himself down to get in between holes and then bursting through. There was a lot to like about Quinshon Judkins. I think he's the real deal. And as we talk about, players needing to step up from this draft class to help Andrew Berry sort of change his reputation as a drafter, Quinshon's is going to be a big part of that, because I think him and Mason are, I don't want to say guarantees, but I think both of them are pretty close to locks to end up being strong, really important and great players for this franchise moving forward. And so that's 2 right there that I think are going to help Andrew Berry sort of change the narratives about him. But 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns for Quinshon Judkins. Crazy, just right, a little overzealous, whatever you want. However, you let me know how you feel about my prediction for Quinshon Judkins, but I'm putting it in stone a little early here that I think those are the numbers he's going to put up in 2025. Speaking of running backs, Quinshon does sort of have some big shoes to fill with Nick Chubb no longer here. And interestingly enough, after he signed with the Houston Texans, the Browns put out a statement, and Jimmy Haslam is already saying he's going in the Ring of Honor. Is that actually a distinction that Nick Chubb is worthy of? We will talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. All right, welcome back in Locked On Browns podcast. And listen, there is a lot to be said about Nick Chubb and exit as he goes to Houston. And listen, he did keep the door open in his statement on this idea that maybe this isn't goodbye or whatever. Like, and maybe there is an opportunity where he comes back down the road. I'm sure when the time comes where he's retiring, he will sign like a one-day contract or whatever and retire with the Cleveland Browns. That just seems fitting for, what Nick Chubb, for how much he loves this place, how much he meant to this place. It would seem just illogical and silly if he didn't retire as a member of the Cleveland Browns. And I think that's probably what's going to happen. Now, that's a different story though than like him coming back and playing, which still could happen. Like if he bounces back this year, all bets are off. Maybe the Browns do circle back and bring him back at some point, even though they have these 2 young running backs. You never know. You never know what the future holds. If he somehow extends his career like 3-4 years here, maybe we're talking about a Nick Chubb down the line who's like a role player on this team or whatever. But I think right now I would say, like, if you look up Nick Chubb's numbers and you look up like the NFL career rushing leaders, and you compare him to some of these all-time greats that are Hall of Famers. Nick Chubb right now is 74th overall in terms of rushing yards all time. And he's got a ways to go to be like really in the pantheon of the all-time greats. Like Josh Jacobs, who is active, is ahead of him. Aaron Jones, who is active, is ahead of him. Saquon Barkley's on a trajectory towards the Hall of Fame. He's ahead of him. Joe Mixon, who's his now teammate, is ahead of him. Ezekiel Elliott, still active in an older age, is ahead of him. Derrick Henry is top 20. Those are the types of backs as you get into like the top 20, the top 50. Like those are guys that are no-brainer Hall of Famers. And Chubb has some work to do to, I think, get into that conversation. Now, the good thing for him is like he's not that far off. He only needs really like 1,200 yards to get into like the top 50. So he's close, but like, for example, even if he gets 1,200 yards, Mark Ingram is the 50th overall in terms of rushing yards in a career, 8,111 yards. Do you think Mark Ingram is a Hall of Famer? No. Now, Nick Chubb has the Pro Bowls and, those types of things to maybe back it up, but we'll see. I would say right now, Nick Chubb is not a Hall of Famer. And so, and that's more of a national NFL level, though, obviously, when you're talking Hall of Fame. From a Browns standpoint, because the Browns in each team has their own Hall of Fame, of course. For the Browns, it's called the Ring of Honor. We know this. there's the Ring of Honor and there's the Legends Club. The Legends Club is just like people who had major impacts on the organization. Phil Dawson, for example, just got inducted into the Legends Club last year. It was a really cool ceremony. They had some fun with it. Phil Dawson's a good dude, and people still love him in this town for how great he was at kicking in that stadium on the lakefront, obviously. But like, I think Chubb, without question, belongs in the Legends Club. When you get to the Ring of Honor, though, and we talk about Hall of Famers, there's only one player in the Browns Ring of Honor that is not a Hall of Famer at this point. And that's Clay Matthews. Clay Matthews is the one guy who is not a Hall of Famer that is in the Browns Ring of Honor. And many people believe Clay Matthews should be a Hall of Famer. Some of the other suspects. Jim Brown is obviously in. From a coaching standpoint, Paul Brown is in. Lou Groza is in. Otto Graham is in. Like, it's Leroy Kelly. Like, there's obvious people who are part of this conversation in terms of belong in the legend or in the Ring of Honor, and who are all-time greats. And for what it's worth, like, Chubb is 400 yards shy of Leroy Kelly, who's in the Legends Club and is a Hall of Famer, but he's 400 yards shy of him in terms of like the Browns all-time leading rushers, with Kelly and Jim Brown still ahead of him. And at one point, it felt like Chubb was on pace to surpass even Jim Brown potentially. Like, he was on that type of trajectory. He was obviously going to pass Leroy Kelly pretty easily. He would have done that by now if he hadn't gotten hurt in 2023. So that's what the bummer is. Like, I would have loved to see him get to second overall. If he had, been able to bounce back last year sooner or finish the season, maybe he would have got there with another 400 yards. Who knows? Maybe not in 3 games, but he would have got a little closer. And so we're sort of deprived of that. But all this to say, the Ring of Honor has been reserved to this point for guys who were in the Hall of Fame. And I do think there's a conversation to be had about, like, should he be in the Ring of Honor? Because in the statement the Browns put out, like I said, Jimmy Haslam said, we look forward to inducting you into the Ring of Honor one day. And I almost wondered if he was, like, speaking out of turn. Like, it was like here's a nice party message, but we don't know if we're really going to do this. Here's what I will say about it. I think you put Nick Chubb in the Ring of Honor because sometimes there's always exceptions to every rule. And when it's your team Hall of Fame, I first of all, I'm a big proponent of, you got to have standards for your own team Hall of Fame. You can't just put everybody in. I make this joke all the time. When I'm if you can't tell from behind me, I'm a Red Sox fan. And when I went on a tour of Fenway Park, they talked about how the standard, how difficult it is to get your jersey retired with the Red Sox or be like in their Hall of Fame thing. And they made a good joke that, like, if you go to the Yankees ballpark, they have they have everybody in the Hall of Fame that basically wore the pinstripes. Like, they got people that were maybe great Yankees, but like maybe, guys that you don't necessarily recognize just in the Hall of Fame because they're Yankees, right? And it's supposed to be the greatest franchise ever and all these different things. And so the whole joke is like, yeah, they don't have standards. Like, they just let anybody in as long as you wear the pinstripes. And I think there is probably some truth in that with the Yankees. Like, they have some sort of lax, and so some of it is like they've always had a lot of great players, admittedly. But the other part of it is like they do just let a lot of people in. And so you do have to have standards, in my opinion, even for your own Hall of Fame. And so I get where that comes into play. But you do have one guy in there who's not a Hall of Famer, in Clay Matthews. And I think with somebody like Nick Chubb, you make an exception, if for nothing else, because of the impact that they had on the franchise, the fan base, the city. Like, off the field, Nick Chubb's impact resonated larger than he was up there with some of the all-time greats of this franchise in terms of resonating with just and the impact he made on the city and everything. Like, for that type of player, you make an exception. Whether he's the all-time leading rusher for your franchise, whether he ends up being a Hall of Famer or not, you make an exception because he was a franchise great, and he was and if not for injuries, he might have been. He would have been on a Hall of Fame trajectory regardless. And like, his impact is almost hard to measure. Like, it's immeasurable because of what he meant to the fan base and what he meant to this franchise as a whole. And he really was like the beating heart for the locker room and the team, and everybody looked to him just as that lead by example, workhorse guy. I mean, for what he means to this city, I think you put him in the Ring of Honor the way that Jimmy Haslam said they were going to. And I think there's no questions asked about it. There's exceptions to every rule. Nick Chubb is that exception. it's hard to find somebody who is the living embodiment of a city and a town the way that he was, on top of being as good of a player that I will tell my kids about watching Nick Chubb play football and how remarkably good and special it was. Every time he touched the ball, it was like you knew you were watching greatness right in front of you. And injuries are probably going to derail maybe his Hall of Fame case and all that. But it should not derail his Ring of Honor case with the Browns, because as far as I'm concerned, he is a Browns all-time great, and he should be in there off of just the aura he brought to this organization alone. But it helps that he was also a tremendous player, which is, again, you have to have standards. He was a great player, and he had this way about him that just connected everything together. City, team, fans, everything. It was remarkable. So to me, Nick Chubb belongs in the Ring of Honor the way that Jimmy Haslam promised they would put him in. But I do understand where some people might push back and then say, like, yeah, make him a legend, but not a Ring of Honor guy. I disagree. I think you make the exception because it's Nick Chubb, and he was that damn good. What say you? Hit me up at SpenC2_. Of course, as I say at the top of the show every single episode, jump in the comment section at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel and let us know, which is where you can get involved on any of the other things that we'll talk about throughout this week. And I promise you there's going to be more to come, including if the Browns get off to a slow start, can Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski survive it? Like, how bad of a slow start could they survive at the beginning of the season? Or do we just believe they're totally safe? And it won't matter what type of start they get off to, because they're going to be back in 2026 regardless. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to hear that conversation or be part of that conversation. And make sure Locked On Browns is your first listen every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting. Or, as I always like to remind you, you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being in every day at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See ya.